What's up, Magic players? It's Doyle, your host here on DoylePrimeMTG. In this most unique crossover, Baby Yoda and Aquaman team up to create the greatest weaponry known to the game of Magic the Gathering: a bunch of rocks.
Forests, islands, mountains, plains, and swamps. The multiverse is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. There is a tingling in the spine, a faint sensation, as if a distant memory, of walking from plane to plane. Our lives have been forever changed, as if by magic. Embark with me on this journey to eternity. Experience the true power of mind over matter, as we ignite your spark and traverse into the magic multiverse.
A large percentage of you already have a lands deck, but as we have largely expanded from Garul to Jund to Naya, I feel like Temur hasn't seen enough lands love, and Temur lands rock. That's why I built this new rock and brew with Toggo Goblin Weaponsmith and Thrasios Triton Hero. Toggo Goblin Weaponsmith costs 2 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Artificer with Partner, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Rock with equipped creature has pay 1, tap, sacrifice rock. This creature deals 2 damage to any target, and equip 1. With Toggo, we are looking to generate a bunch of these rock equipment, and while we will be using some of them for spot removal, we can also utilize them in a number of other ways to our benefit, and hopefully our opponent's downfall. Thrasios Triton Hero costs blue-green for a 1/3 Merfolk with Partner, and pay 4 to scry 1, then reveal the top card of your library. If that card is a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, otherwise draw a card. Thrasios has this uncanny ability to take any other partner commander and just make it good. To find out how we are going to take this land strategy to the winner's podium, we need to do a few things thematically. We need to ramp, draw cards, control, and close out the game. The focus of our ramp package is of course going to be lands, but before we get to that, there are a few artifacts that I would like to take a look at. First up, we have a Soul Ring, which costs 1 and taps for 2. Next up, we have an Arcane Signet to help us fix our colors. It costs 2 and taps for 1 of any of our commander's colors. Then allow me to introduce Inspiring Statuary. This allows us to use our artifacts, all of our rock tokens, to tap for colorless mana and help cast our non-artifact spells by giving those spells Improvise. This will surely ramp us by a ton, and it being an artifact itself can also tap for the Improvise ability. Now on to the land ramp spells. First up, Life from the Loam costs 1 and a green for a sorcery that lets us return up to 3 land cards from our graveyard to our hand, and also has Dredge 3. This is a mechanic all on its own, helping us fill our graveyard and keep a full grip of lands to play. Also costing 1 and a green each, these next 4 spells will find us a land into play tapped. Farseek will let us find a land with a non-forest land type and put it into play tapped. Nature's Lore and 3 Visits will each let us find a forest land and put that into play tapped. Into the North finds us a snow land into play tapped. This means that we can find a snow basic, or we can also find Dark Depths. Harrow costs 2 a green, and as an additional cost will sack a land to find 2 basic lands and put them into play. Roiling Regrowth is basically the same thing, but the lands come into play tapped. And Springbloom Druid is a Roiling Regrowth on a stick, with an optional ETB trigger to give us this effect. Blighted Woodland is a colorless land that has 3 green, tap, sacrifice Blighted Woodland, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Lotus Cobra is a slam dunk, costing 1 and a green. We get a 2/1 snake that generates us a mana of any color when a land comes into play. Uvenwild Hydra is quite a house. For 3 green, we get a Hydra creature whose power and toughness are equal to the number of lands we control. And upon entering the battlefield, it lets us search our library for any land into play tapped. Storm the Vault costs 2 red-blue for an enchantment that gets us a treasure each time one of our creatures deals combat damage. But at the end of our turn, if we have 5 or more artifacts, it flips into a land that taps for blue mana equal to the number of artifacts we control. Dumping this mana into Thrasios is just insane. Another massive mana generator is Seedborn Muse, untapping all of our permanents on each other player's untap step. One can only imagine the amount of mana we can dump into Thrasios, not to mention all of the other things that we could be doing, throwing rocks, casting instants, etc. Playing lands from the grave is also quite useful, especially when it also allows us to play the land side of our MDFCs from the grave. To do this, we have included Crucible of Worlds, Ramming Up Excavator, and Ancient Green Warden. In addition to all that, the Green Warden doubles up all of our landfall abilities. We want to play as many lands as we can each turn, so let's see how we can play extra lands. Exploration costs a green for an enchantment that lets us play an additional land per turn. Azusa Lost But Seeking costs 2 and a green for a legendary creature that allows us to play 2 additional lands per turn. Courser of Krufix costs 1 green for a creature that lets us play lands from the top of our library and gains us life when we do play lands, but it requires that we play with the top of our library revealed. Dryad of the Elysian Grove costs 2 and a green for a creature that lets us play an additional land per turn, and it makes all of our lands into all basic land types. Wayward Swordtooth costs 2 and a green for a 5/5 dinosaur creature that has Ascend, and lets us play an additional land per turn, but it cannot attack until we have the City's Blessing. Mina and Den Wildborn costs 2 red-green for a creature that lets us play an additional land per turn, and if we pay red-green, we can bounce a land to our hand and give target creature we control trample until end of turn. Bridging into the next category quite smoothly, AZ, Tyrant of Gyre Strait, costs 4 blue-green for a serpent creature that allows us to play an additional land per turn, and also draws us a card whenever a land enters our battlefield. So next, let's see how, in addition to Thrasios, we can draw some cards to use all this extra mana on. Alone, Training Grounds won't draw us cards, but with Thrasios in play, the value generation is obscene. Excavation is an enchantment for 1 and a blue that lets any player pay 1 and sack a land to draw a card. Trade Routes is another enchantment for 1 and a blue that allows us to pay 1 to return a land to our hand, or we could pay 1 and discard a land card to draw a card. Valakut Exploration adds some impulsive draw and burn. Costing 2 and a red, whenever a land enters our battlefield, we exile the top card of our library and can cast it for as long as it remains exiled. At the beginning of our end step, though, we put all cards removed this way into our graveyard and deal damage to each opponent equal to those cards' total converted mana costs. Tectonic Reformation gives lands in our hand cycling for a red. This doesn't usually give us card advantage, but it does when we can play lands from the grave. Tireless Tracker costs 2 and a green for a creature that gives us clue tokens on a landfall ability. We can then pay 2 and sack those tokens to draw cards. Omnath, Locus of the Royal, draws us cards on landfall if we have 8 or more lands. His other abilities are just kinda niche here. Tatiova, Benthic Druid, allows us to draw a card and gains us life on each landfall trigger. Let's also not forget AC. Shimmer Dragon will let us put our rocks to good use. For 4 blue, we get a creature that allows us to tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to draw a card. All this value must be protected. Control helps us do just that. Sylvan Safekeeper costs a green for a creature that lets us sack a land to give target creature we control Shroud until end of turn. Confounding Conundrum costs 1 and a blue for an enchantment that bounces all but the first land that our opponents have enter the battlefield during each turn, and it also draws us a card on entry. Oko, Thief of Crowns, is ridiculous. He's basically a repeatable Beast Within, but better, and also on a Planeswalker Plus ability. Otherwise, a Beast Within works here just fine. Mirage Mirror is always a good add, as it can copy any artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until the end of turn. Cyclonic Rift is good, I hear. It seems okay to me. Let's take a chance, eh? Crop Rotation is going to let us tutor a land to the battlefield in place of a land that we sacrifice. These next few cards bridge the gap between control and being able to close out the game. Rampage the Clans is fierce. For 3 and a green, we can cast this at instant speed to destroy all artifacts and enchantments, replacing each of them with a 3/3 Centaur creature token. This acts as a wipe, but can also replace all of our beloved rocks with centaurs before the end step, ready to march at our following combat. Girapur Aether Grid costs 2 and a red for an enchantment that lets us tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to deal 1 damage to any target. Akum Hellkite costs 4 red for a dragon creature that lets us deal 1 damage to any target on a landfall ability. This damage is doubled if that land is a mountain. Both Girapur Aether Grid and Akum Hellkite can be used to deal damage to our opponents or to their permanents, bridging control with WinCon. Alongside these cards, let's see what else is going to help us close out the game. Reckless Fireweaver costs 1 and a red for a creature that pings each opponent for 1 damage when an artifact enters our battlefield. Tunneling Geopede costs 2 and a red for a creature that pings each opponent for 1 damage on a landfall trigger. Scoot Swarm creates bug tokens on a landfall ability, but creates copies of itself instead if we control 6 or more lands. Zendikar's Royal is an enchantment for 3 green that makes 2/2 creature tokens on a landfall ability. Rampaging Balos costs 4 green for a 6/6 beast with trample that creates a 4/4 green beast creature token on a landfall ability. Avenger of Zendikar costs 5 green and enters the battlefield to create 0/1 plant tokens for each land that we control. It also gives a +1/+1 counter to each plant on a landfall ability. Omnath Locus of Rage costs 3 red green for an elemental creature that makes 5/5 elementals on a landfall ability. He can also dish out some damage if those elementals die. Field of the Dead is a land that makes 2/2 black zombie tokens on a landfall ability if we control 7 or more lands with different names. We have lots of ways to trigger these landfall abilities, but we can go even bigger. Nahiri's Lithoforming costs red and X for a sorcery that has us sacrifice X lands, draw X cards, and lets us play an additional X lands that turn. Scapeshift lets us sacrifice any number of lands, search our library for that many lands, and put those lands onto the battlefield tapped, all for 2 green. Splendid Reclamation returns all lands in our graveyard to the battlefield tapped for only 3 and a green. And finally, Kodama of the East Tree goes infinite with Toggo and a bounce land, giving us infinite landfall triggers and infinite rock tokens, making our triggering permanents go haywire. A few extra closers that I decided to include are Dark Depths, which is a land that can eventually turn into a 2020 legendary creature token with Indestructible. Brutaclad Telecore Engineer, which costs 4 red for a creature that not only gives our tokens haste, but also can indiscriminately turn all of our token permanents into a copy of one specific token permanent that we control at the beginning of combat. Most notably, this could turn all of our creature and rock tokens into 4/4 beasts or 5/5 elementals. Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is a land that taps for red, but it also lets us bolt any target for 3 damage anytime a mountain enters our battlefield. Combo this with Elysian Dryad to turn this into a closer. Valduk, Keeper of the Flame, can make use of the rock equipment, creating hasty 3/1 elementals at the beginning of each combat for each equipment attached to him. Mechanized Production helps us focus on the term win the game, as we can enchant any artifact we control to make a copy of it at our upkeep, and then if we have 8 or more of those artifacts at our upkeep, we win the game. As for our lands, we are trying to stuff a lot of value in here, so first take a look at the MDFC lands that we are including. Balaged Recovery costs 2 and a green for an MDFC sorcery that returns a card from our graveyard to our hand, or it could be played as a tapped land. Valakut Awakening is a sorcery for 2 and a red that lets us wheel our hand, but it can also be played as a tapped red land instead. Seagate Restoration generates unreal value, drawing us a card for each card in our hand and removing our max hand size for the rest of the game. But since it costs 4 and 3 blue mana, it's nice that we can just play it as a land. For further value on our lands, Ghost Town will let us return it to our hand for free on an opponent's turn. Strip Mine will let us take down 1 power-packed land from our opponent's field. Vesuva and Thespian Stage will let us copy other lands, notably Dark Depths, Valakut, and Field of the Dead, allowing us to double value or get an early Merit Lage. We also included the 3 Temur bounce lands for the combo. The rest of the lands are for color fixing. The focus here is to find as many lands with different names as possible to trigger Field of the Dead more easily. I included the artifact lands of color, I included the on-color fetch lands, I included the really good dual type lands. I split my basics evenly between snow and standard basics. Look, your mana base is your business. This mana base, which is mostly proxies, is in the deck list in the description. Don't be afraid to ask your playgroup what kinds of proxies they would allow on the table. I enjoy picking up proxies from mythicblackhore.com, especially if they have some Star Wars themed alternate art available. And that about wraps it up for this deck tech. I hope you enjoyed the video. You'll find the link to the full deck list on architect.com in the description, complete with the maybe board. Let me know in the comments below if you would take this deck in a different direction, or if there are any key includes that I missed. Cheers to the new year, and happy casting.
If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button, and also share it with your friends. If you want to see more videos like these, or hear me ramble about how to navigate this Magic multiverse, go ahead and click that subscribe button to stay up to date on the latest from me, Doyle Prime, and the happenings throughout Magic the Gathering. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you all next video.